just a bit. The LFO, it's great. I'm Juno Buchanan and welcome to the Studio Tour 2024. So this is episode 150 on the YouTube channel, and it felt like it might be quite nice to break with normal tradition and rather than teach you something new about Logic, talk to you a little bit about my room and my rig and the way that I work. And so today what I'm going to do is to show you around the room and explain a little bit why I've chosen the bits of gear that I rely on every day for my main job, which is writing music for TV. So the whole studio effectively exists within a double garage. When I bought this house, and I moved into this house, this became the space which got sacrificed from a sort of parking cars perspective into becoming the studio, because of course, what could be more important? So effectively this room is a shell within the garage itself. So effectively it's a box. When I designed it, sort of took it off the floor and off the ceiling and off the walls. So effectively I can get round the outside of this space within this garage space. But obviously from a sonic isolation point of view, there are huge advantages to that as well. So it's pretty soundproofed, which is great because obviously I'm neighbours, but also it's been great from a moisture perspective. There's a really boring thing for me to say, but I've said it now. So there are real advantages to the fact that the room is kind of like a room within a room. It's just off being square, which of course is like immediately, for anyone who knows anything about studio design, just immediately like, why did you do that? But the space is the size that it is, and I wanted to kind of maximize it. So effectively, as you can see, I'm heavily reliant on the kind of acoustic treatment that's in this room to make sure that the environment within this room sounds as good as it possibly can. So effectively I've got panels all the way around and a cloud on the ceiling, and what that does is to not provide soundproofing. So it's the difference between acoustic treatment and soundproofing. Soundproofing is about how much sound escapes the room, and acoustic treatment is about how you manage the acoustics within the room. So making sure that the reflections from bass and treble are as controlled as they can possibly be. And so, yeah, effectively the acoustics are managed as a result of these panels. And what that does is to give me a very true sound, which is really good for mixing. It's much less vibey than a really nice, interesting studio space might be. So before I lived here, I lived briefly in a converted church. And from an acoustics perspective, that's the other end of the spectrum. Amazingly big and echoey, much more exciting from a sonic point of view, but much less controllable. So I've kind of had studios in lots and lots of different spaces, and there are advantages and disadvantages. And this room is much less live and much less interesting from that perspective, but totally reliable. So if I make recordings of anything in here, they're dry, they're controlled, and yeah, I can then do what I need to those recordings to fit into the projects that I write. But yeah, it would be nice eventually to kind of get back to a space which has got a kind of live component to it as well, because there's a lot more fun to be had in rooms that have just got a bit more spark. Oof. Careful. So first things first, this room has two ends to it. So there's the kind of YouTube end where I shoot the content that you guys watch and write nice comments about. Thank you for those. And then there's the kind of other end of the room, which is the bit behind me, which is where I tend to write most of the music that I write for television. And I'll talk you through that rig first because it's just changed. So the computer behind me is a Mac Studio, which you may just be able to see the edge of behind the iPad. I don't know if you can or not. It's a sort of fully maxed out M2 Ultra with lots of RAM. And effectively, that is the beating heart of the studio. So for TV, and a lot of the TV music that I write sort of comes as a relationship, as a result of the relationship that I have with the production music company that I write for. an enormous amount of what is required as far as that is concerned is recall, the ability to go back to a piece of music, to have all of the settings immediately return to the place where they were where last I left them. So television companies quite often suddenly say, yeah, well, great, we love this, but can we have a version without the brass or with more brass? And so what I need to be able to do is to go back into lots of projects that might be ongoing at any given moment. And so therefore the computer is absolutely central to the middle of the studio, if you like. So a fast computer capable of running multiple libraries of sounds all at the same time is what is central to the way that my work is sort of based around. And so obviously the significant investment is in the computer first and foremost. So what you can see around you as well is that I've developed a room with sort of multiple screens for different things. So the iPad tends to be where I host video. There's a nice big TV up there for when clients pop round, but actually I quite like to have video at the eye line where I'm working within Logic. So what I've got is an iPad which I can use for Logic Remote, but also I use it for hosting video. So if I'm working on projects to picture, then obviously I can put the picture there. Obviously the main screen is where I tend to put the main page of Logic. And then the screen over there is where either I can have an extension of my sort of Logic desktop, or it's where I configure recordings. So you can see at the moment that the UAD console software is up and running on that screen. So if I'm working with the synths, or if I've got a singer in, or if I'm recording something in this room, effectively I'm in a position to configure the way that I can make recordings, or make recordings of either line level instruments like the synths or mic signals within the room through console. And that's because my audio interface of choice is a Universal Audio Apollo interface. I have been a UAD devotee for a long, long time. And the reason for that, I got very lucky actually. So for a long time I worked, and in fact, where Will and I met was working for magazines for Future Publishing, Future Music magazine in the UK. And I used to do a lot of reviews as well as making Logic-based content for the DVD, and before that, the CD that went on the cover of that magazine every month. And Will was the multimedia editor at the time, and that's how we got to know each other. But where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so I used to write a lot of reviews as well, and I got called by the then editor of Future Music magazine to say, Universal Audio are really keen that rather than us giving hardware to multiple reviewers, we select somebody who's going to review the UAD stuff, and would you like that person to be you? And I was like, yes, please. So I got involved with UAD plugins really early on, when in fact the way that those plugins were hosted was on a PCIe e-card, which used to go in the back of I think a G4 computer and then a G5, and now obviously because I really like their plugins, I have the Apollo interface. It's not the most recent Apollo interface, but the pre's are still absolutely wonderful. And obviously they are a means by which to host UAD plugins as well. And you can see that I've really invested in that. So the two satellites, in fact, that are kind of underneath the main screen there as well are an extension of the kind of UAD world, so I can host more plugins. So I don't have any more pre's for recording, but what they effectively allow me to do is to host more UAD plugins, because UAD plugins work outside of the computer. So the kind of grunt, the processing power is actually carried out on the hardware outside of the box. And for a long time, that was incredibly useful, because as computers have developed their relationship with software plugins, there was a time when actually the fact that the computer didn't have to be doing all of the processing for UAD was incredibly helpful. Obviously, computers have got faster and more powerful, and now you can run UAD stuff natively, but I have that still hosted on the hardware. What else is behind me? Okay, so underneath the satellites, there is a UAD UA610. So that's one of a number of preamps that I have in the room. And again, it's a lovely recording channel, sort of tube-based, sort of classic UA, beautiful sounding thing. Also plugged into the desk behind me, two more channels of Focusrite ISA, the Duo plugin, which is here, the ISA 2. So effectively two super clean, not particularly sexy sounding, but perfectly good sort of interfacing. And in fact, rather than using that for ins, what I have done in the past is to use that as a means to get sound out. So in other words, the Apollo has produced a sort of parallel output. So if I've needed to record the sound of the computer computer out to something else. It's come out through the ISA 2. So that's what that's sitting there to do. And then underneath that is the distressor, amazingly punchy, super characterful, mono channel of compression. Absolutely great if you really want to mess with stuff. Truthfully, ever since UAD have made their version of that box, I tend to do that now in the computer, but it's absolutely great for like mono signals, so really great for aggressive bass, that kind of thing if you're working in mono. So that compressor is a favourite, but it has to be said, has been slightly replaced by the software version of that. And then behind me on the left-hand side is the Apollo, which is obviously, as I say, my main interface. And above that is a Blackmagic dock, which is effectively hosting SSD drives, which are full of projects, obviously, but also samples. So a huge part of the day job for me is writing music in multiple different genres, and they include many of the genres that require orchestral and other sort of instrument-based libraries. So I do a lot of stuff with Contact, sort of at the heart of what I do, hosting, as I say, software libraries from all different types of companies. So as with lots of people who work as composers, over time, what I've done is to build up a substantial collection of plugins which allow me to kind of write in the genres that I write in. The controller keyboard, which is under the desk here, is a Studio Logic SL88 Grand, which is absolutely fine. That's what I'm going to say about that. It's nice. I like it. It's I grew up playing the piano, and so it's important to me to have a controller keyboard that feels like I get to play the piano a little bit. And so that's what that is. It feels like I'm not giving that any love, but it's absolutely fine. It does its job. And also on the desk, there's a Moog Sirin. Nice little mono synth. There's a bit of Moog in the room. We'll come back to a couple of other things as well. I think I'm supposed to say Moog, but I've said Moog now, so I'll let you choose. Debate will rage. That's what all the comments on this video are going to be about. I've now realised, having said Moog out loud. So the Moog Sirin is on the desk. Really nice little, very straightforward to use, punchy little mono synth. So it sort of sits there right in front of me, and every once in a while feels like a really good idea to get a bit of that into my projects. So that's what's sitting there. And then lots of people ask on the videos what the controller is. It feels like I shouldn't tell you. That's a Monogram controller surface. So effectively what that does is to give me modulation, expression, and vibrato. So controllers 1, 10 and 21. So for driving orchestral libraries, it's an amazingly useful device. And then I've got a jog shuttle wheel, which provides me with kind of logic zoom left and right. And then a rotator, which does the same thing vertically. And then a couple of buttons, which are just set up for specific key commands. Save. And I've totally forgotten what the other one is. I use it on muscle memory. Oh yeah, looping round cycle areas. So that's mostly just for driving orchestral libraries and having access to those controllers. So in terms of what's kind of in front of me, you know, the slightly boring thing to say is that obviously the computer is mainly the instrument that I'm reliant on now. So for recall, whilst it would be absolutely lovely if it were possible to get a lot of the hardware, which I'll come to over there, sort of into everyday workflow, the truth of it is that I tend to use this stuff for input. So in other words, I'll write with it and then I'll print it as audio and it will become part of those projects. So rather than all of this hardware being something which is absolutely geared and set up within my Logic projects, within my template to be highly recallable, that's not how I tend to use this stuff. I tend to use it for, I want the vibe of that particular synth, I'm going to commit to it, I'm going to print it as audio, then effectively when I come back to a project, it's there in front of me in that form. And that might sound really limiting, but actually I don't find that it is. It's a really nice way of getting kind of character and a kind of individual quality into those synths and into my projects, but I don't use it in a highly recallable way. And part of that is because the Juno, which is sitting at the bottom of that, is just not a recallable instrument in the same way that some of the other synths might be, but I use all of them for kind of input only. And I would definitely say that in a way, that's what a lot of this room is set up to do. So I've already talked about the 610 as a channel strip input for the recordings that I might like to make. So in the rack behind me over here, there is also a Heritage Audio Brit strip, which is a kind of Neve style channel strip input stage for recording. So that's this box right here. I should turn it on. And now it is on. So effectively what that gives me is a really nice preamp channel. with a compressor in it as well. So if I'm making vocal recordings in here, my vocal mic gets plugged into that box and that goes onto the Apollo, and there's a lovely sound, very Neve sound that comes from that particular box, and sort of based on the 1073, but with a compression stage in there as well. Absolutely glorious for recording single channel vocals in particular. I tend to use it for. So again, it's about getting the kind of input stage right and getting a kind of quality from what I'm recording, but once it's recorded, it's in the computer, and then obviously it becomes part of the project and is highly recallable in that regard. What I've also got down here is a little line level mixer right down at the bottom, a completely unremarkable, again, sounds really pejorative, Samson little line level mixer, and all of these synths are basically plugged into that, and from that they go onto the Apollo. So effectively all it's doing is sitting there as a kind of passive stage to allow me to take all of the inputs from all of the synths, and from there they go into the Apollo, so effectively just into the same stereo pair. So rather than the Apollo requiring lots and lots of separate inputs for all of the separate synths, I'm effectively kind of summing that down, and I generally tend to use whichever synth I want, and I'll literally just unmute that at the stage of the mixer, and that will provide me with the sound that I want, and then I record it and it becomes part of my project. And what I've also done there is to leave in a couple of legacy things from the good old days. So there's a very old Motu 828, which sort of sits there reminding me of like where my sort of audio interfacing journey started. And there's also a sort of Lexicon hardware output, MPX1, I think is the name of that particular reverb unit, which is actually a multi-effects processor. I remember getting that and thinking like my whole life had changed, because I bought that at a time when the workstations that we rely on these days couldn't do effects processing in nearly the ways that they can now. And that suddenly just opened up a whole bunch of multi-effects kind of reverbs into filters, into delays, and an opportunity to kind of curate interesting spatial solutions for sounds. And it felt like an extraordinary sort of development to the arsenal of things I had available to me. And again, at the moment, it's just kind of taking up space in the rack and I don't use it anymore. But it's a nice little reminder of where things were. And similarly, I think there is, the classic AMT8 eMagic MIDI interface. And I think I'm right in saying that it's no longer possible to get a driver for that box. It isn't?
Mine's working.
Will's is working. I'm wrong about that. I should get that back into play. So obviously eMagic were the guys who originally developed Logic, and before Apple then bought that program and made it part of the sort of Apple world. There you go. You see, it's sitting there, and at the moment, again, it just feels like, it was a groundbreaking moment where suddenly I could do MIDI interfacing with multiple synthesizers at once. But I've replaced that with a much less exciting Motu MIDI time port. But again, it allows me to do interfacing, so I can send MIDI signals to these synths over here. So in terms of kind of the stuff that's in front of me, that's what's mostly going on. Oh, and of course the Moog Little Fatty, which is a great synth, particularly for basses. I mean, it's great for all sorts of things, but for really punchy Moog style bass, that just sits there, right there, plugged in like the other synths, ready for me to program bass lines and other sounds, but I tend to use it for bass. It's a great synth. So in terms of monitoring, I use the Event Opals. Now I've had an interesting journey with these speakers. I absolutely love them, and like lots of people who work with a pair of speakers that they just come to know and love, I feel like I can trust them. The mixes I make here translate well to the places where I need them to translate. Great, but my word, have they been not entirely reliable. So one of those speakers has been around the world sort of getting fixed. I think it was away actually for over a year because I had a hardware fault while it was still in warranty. So I still had one here, and when the other one came back, I think its kind of whole power supply had been replaced. So they're not even really a matched pair anymore. They're just a little story in their own right. So I love them to pieces. Occasionally, one of them has a very weird little electrical crackle, which sort of lasts for about 30 seconds, and then it just goes and everything is fine again. I live slightly in fear of the day where that crackle just becomes something that never really goes away. But actually, I adore them. They're amazing sounding speakers. They've just been not as reliable as they might have been, but I can't bring myself to change them because I absolutely love them to pieces. So the Opals are great, albeit they've been like, I don't know, what's the best example? They're a little bit like, the brother you can't quite trust. You adore them and, you'll do anything for them, but at the same time, every once in a while, they let you down. Not like my actual brother. He's a wonderful guy. Okay, so in terms of mics, these days I rely on two microphones really for the recordings that I make, unless something unexpected happens in here. But this is an original KM84 Neumann microphone with the two-call connector. That's what this is called. So effectively the XLR lead is converted from a DIN port on the back of the actual mic itself. Sort of classic, amazingly great pencil mic for recording. Well, I record violin in here with it, but any sort of solo instrument, just mono mic, beautiful, great sounding. What is true about microphones is that the sort of better the microphone, the less you have to do to the signal afterwards. So in other words, rather than having to use extensive plugins to kind of get the sound that you want, actually from an EQ and a kind of almost even from a compression point of view, at the point of recording, if you can get a lovely clean recording, it just tends to be true that you need to do less later. So this mic is beautiful for instrument recording. And then this really is an amazing sort of luxurious vocal mic choice. So this is the Flea 12. Sorry, I croaked. This is the Flea 12. I got so emotional talking about the microphone, my voice went. So this is based on the classic sort of 1950s AKG C12 capsule, and this is Flea's version of this amazing microphone. This, yeah, is just unbelievable on vocals. So it's yeah, sort of pride of place. Whenever I'm recording vocals in here for projects, then yeah, this is the mic that I use, and it's just a totally beautiful, tubey, warm, amazingly frequency rich sound. And again, just straight out of the mic, it sounds absolutely incredible. That into the Brit strip, into the Apollo, into the computer. Ooh, it's like Christmas every day. For those of you who like Christmas. So anyway, the Flea 12, a beautiful thing. Listen to that. That's just the spring reverb. It's real. Fun. So this is a Moog Grandmother. This is a kind of semi-modular synth, which means that whilst the modules allow you to just configure sounds in a kind of regular synth way, you can also get all kinds of interesting weirdness going on where you can effectively patch different modules together, but also potentially patch out to other modular based instruments. So I tend to use the Grandmother as a little bit of a kind of ideas machine. I quite like coming here to make total chaos, creating drones, weird sort of soundscapes and things that feel like they'll go alongside software instruments really nicely. So it's capable of all kinds of things, but I tend to use it for kind of slightly unpredictable stuff. Virus, this has been with me forever. And it's a violently acidic kind of amazing little, yeah, desktop module of a synth. Really great for, yeah, anything which has got some bite. So again, really great for basses, nice for pads, but once upon a time when I used to write music which required synth leads, it was great for that too. But yeah, lovely little instrument here. This one currently isn't plugged in, but this is a Dave Smith instrument, the Mofo. Who likes this colour? I mean, no one really likes this colour, but as the colour suggests, it's an amazing little waspy kind of monosynth with, again, lots of internal kind of routing, lots of possibilities. I don't use it as much as I did these days. It sort of fits into the soundscape for what I'm doing now, much less than it used to, but it's still an instrument that I come back to from time to time. The OB6, which is this collaboration between Tom Oberheim and Dave Smith, is this kind of classic, amazingly warm, but again, sort of slightly bright synth. A lot of people say too bright. I love it. I love it for brightness. It's a really nice counter to some of the other instruments here in terms of the kind of fizz and the top end that you can get out of this instrument, but equally the filters are so beautiful that if you want to get rid of some of that, you absolutely can. So amazingly versatile sort of polysynth, really a beautiful thing. And then the classic down here at the bottom, the Juno 60. So again, I was talking about Roland earlier on, very much an absolute Roland classic. You can see sort of covered in all sorts of crazy stuff. Just amazing for pads and just for richness of sound. There's no way that the variety of sounds and the warmth and depth of them should be as broad as it is for an instrument that is in a way, so basic and so easy to understand, and yet there is just a quality to the noises that come out of this instrument that are just sort of unparalleled. So yeah, that's the synth rack. Feel the resonance. Okay, so this end of the room should be a little bit more familiar, albeit this is a new angle. So this is obviously the end of the room where I tend to make YouTube videos, in fact, where we've made all of the YouTube videos, and what a long way this room has come in that time. So if you go back and watch episode 1, where I was younger and had less grey hair, also the room wasn't treated at this end. I couldn't afford to do it all in one go, so I did the other end of the room where I did most of my work, and so the acoustics at this end of the room were shocking for a little while, but that's okay. And I think the number of synths in the collection over there was more limited at that time too. So effectively what I've got here now is another Mac Studio feeding this display. Although that said, the reason why the laptop's on the screen is because I've started making more of the content that I make for you guys to watch, you know, when I'm out and about and around in different places. And so I've actually started making a lot more of that on the laptop. And again, the laptop just plugs into the screen and effectively has become the computer that I make that content on at this end of the room a little bit more. These speakers are Adam A77Xs. I bought these when the event Opals were playing up, and they were an incredibly useful, albeit slightly less hi-fi experience, I guess, than the Opals, but they're absolutely great. I really like them, and for this end of the room, they're absolutely fine, and they do all my monitoring when I'm working down this end. As you will also have known, you guys have been part of the evolution of this end of the room. You'll know that probably about 6 months ago, I swapped out the NI controller keyboard with mini keys that I was using at this end of the room for something that actually made a noise. So this is the little baby version of the ASM Hydra Synth, which is a pretty versatile, pretty portable, quite deep, rich, capable synthesizer. Very modern. It's almost like a kind of hybrid hardware software instrument in a way. It sort of feels a lot like software to use in lots of ways. And what I've tried to do at this end of the room is to put together a rig that is largely pretty portable. So the other thing hiding behind the laptop screen at the moment is a UA Volt 276 interface, which is absolutely great. I think they're really fantastic interfaces. Not all of the money for 2 really great UA channels of audio recording, and that's what I use for audio interfacing at this end of the room, but it's definitely a device that I chuck in a backpack, and when I'm not here and working elsewhere, a brilliant thing to be able to take somewhere else. So all of this rig minus the screen feels like it's pretty portable, and there's an iPad here as well for a bit of Logic Remote, albeit I don't use it that much, actually, I have to say. I've just got used to working inside computers, I guess. So yeah, this end of the room, very familiar, and yeah, this is where I mostly make video content. And of course, this is the most underused, most requested device in the studio from a comments perspective from you guys. So this is the Espressive Touche pedal. I always say pedal, and it's not a pedal. It doesn't live on the floor. This is designed to be kind of played with the hand. So Espressive, an amazing sort of French company who have built a bunch of software instruments and this extraordinary controller, which effectively allows you to manipulate sound sort of left, right, up and down, squeeze, all kinds of stuff. And is it the most underused bit of kit in the studio from this end of the studio perspective? Yeah, without question. So this is definitely something that I intend to bring far more into the workflow and to demonstrate the capabilities of, especially bearing in mind we've made videos about MIDI in, and here's me not using it from a kind of manipulation perspective. So I must do that. So when I first decided to set up a YouTube channel, it was obviously with teaching Logic in mind, and obviously that's what I've done. So I've stayed pretty religiously just within a Logic space when it comes to the teaching that I do. And if you guys want kind of deeper dives into a broader range of techniques, then obviously the whole idea of launching the teachable courses that are available, I say courses, watch this space, is effectively to have an opportunity to dive much more into my day job, the idea of writing music for TV and the kind of orchestral programming courses, which exist now within Teachable, or very soon to, the second one. is all about being able to go further. But this end of the room is all about logic. And with that in mind, the kind of interaction between the two ends of the room in terms of what I use the two computers for. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes I prepare content that I'm going to sort of put together for the YouTube channel at that end of the room and bring it down here. And obviously there are a number of ways of doing that, just in terms of networking the computers and literally just dragging files from one computer to another. In fact, that's possible across the network. Or if I'm making content elsewhere and just want to be able to upload it, then obviously I use Dropbox and other resources like that to be able to have backups of the projects that I'm working on and to be able to transfer them between different computers as well. So this room isn't designed for two composers to work in at the same time. There definitely feels like there's a kind of separation between the two ends of the room. But yeah, there's no reason why that can't change in the future in terms of what this space could be used for. But I definitely tend to see this end of the room as the kind of logic only end. And that obviously is the sort of composition end where logic is the center of the kind of musical ecosystem that I'm reliant on for the job that I do on a sort of day-to-day basis. So if you've made it all the way to the end of the video, you must have as much of a kind of gear fetish as I do. Welcome. I know you're never going to escape it. But listen, thanks for watching. And yeah, I hope this has been an instructive video and obviously an opportunity for me to show you my workspace. So yeah, as always, any questions, put them in the comments. And yeah, thanks for watching. And also, this is episode 150, as I mentioned at the beginning, and this is definitely an opportunity for me to say a sincere thank you to all of you who have been part of the journey. We're very nearly at 10,000 subscribers, and whilst, as you all have noticed, I've never been a guy who's asked you to like or subscribe, I am hugely grateful to all of you who do those things, who interact in the comments, and who are finding the videos useful. I'm really hugely grateful. I love the community that's built up around this channel, and it's something I'm really proud of. So as always, please do send through suggestions for videos as you want them, for sure, but also thanks for being part of the journey up to this point with lots of exciting things coming in the future.